you know how many diseases are there? In an article published in 2016, there are 10,000 identified diseases. And you know how many drugs are available? Like how many diseases are curable? Can anyone just want to take a wild guess? How many diseases are curable? Just throw any number. 500. You know why? Because drug discovery is only based on trial and error, and it takes forever to develop new drugs. Our next speaker is on a mission to change this. He is the CEO of a company called Verseon, which is pioneering the drug discovery through AI. So I would now like to invite on stage Adityo Prakash, who will throw some light on how he is doing this. So please join me in welcoming Adityo Prakash.
I'll use this. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So, did everybody get that energy break and everything? If you need more time, otherwise, we'll get started. So, I'll start with a little story. Talking to a friend of mine, Dan, in June, he was telling me, man, I'm so tired of COVID. I'm done with it, all right? I've been putting off this cruise for a while. I'm going on it. I understood the sentiment. I think as a society, we're all ready to sort of move on, be able to attend conferences like these in person, not get kicked off flights because of a cough, right? It's about time that we get to move on from all of this. So, a few weeks ago, Dan called me to say that they did go on that cruise. Both he and his wife are down with 101-degree fever. They're COVID positive. But we, as humans, have lived with cold and flu for millennia. So what's the difference with COVID? What's the big deal, right? It turns out COVID actually leaves a lot more damage on our organs, even in mild to moderate cases. It damages all our vital organs from heart to kidneys to lungs to whatever else, okay? And that is a problem. A recent study from Cambridge showed that in the case of severe COVID, that's equivalent to about 20 years of aging of your brain. Think about that for a moment. I'm not here to do scaremongering. It's just what the results show us. All of us have seen, graffiti written on bathroom walls, right? It says, I was here. Somebody gets really excited about making sure everybody knows that he or she was there. Guess what? COVID does the same thing to our bodies. It leaves scrawls on our organs saying, I was here. And that's not where the full damage of COVID ends. Over the last few years during the pandemic, many of us have delayed routine screens. A friend of mine, a surgeon who should know better, delayed his routine prostate cancer screen, and a year and a half later, his cancer was very advanced, and he's currently fighting for his life. Another friend of mine, who works for an EDA company, his doctors kept having video calls with him. Instead of bringing him in and doing the actual physical tests and doing the imaging, and as a result, he ended up with very advanced bladder cancer. And theirs are not isolated cases. This has been happening to hundreds of millions of people across the globe. Have any of you tried going to a doctor recently and had to fill out all those forms, right? Asking about COVID-related questions and the new COVID protocols you must satisfy to be able to be seen or have a procedure, etc. You know that's not free, right? It actually slows down our healthcare delivery systems. So the world was ready to move on. We are ready to move on as a society, but we may be done with COVID, but COVID's not done with us. The latest news is that the Omicron variant BA.5 can infect you every month, again and again and again. We're not developing any immunity against it. With the developing world's aging population, we were already supposed to really stress our healthcare systems over the next 10 years, okay? Now we have this massive population walking around on the globe of younger age with insides that are looking much, much older. It's accelerating the process and the timeline in which our healthcare systems have to intervene in rather serious ways. And you combine that with the slowdown of healthcare delivery, as a society, we're heading in a bad direction. How do you address these problems? The pandemic has really focused our attention across the globe, regular people to investors to the pharma industry, and how do we come up with new and better medicines, right? But really what we need are three things. First of all, our healthcare systems are really designed to treat a small number of patients who have a serious major acute disease. They're not really focused on helping you extend your health span, slow down your aging process. Your doctor doesn't know anything about it, or most doctors don't. Turns out, based on current scientific evidence, you can actually slow down all 9 core hallmarks of aging. Did you know that? With active ingredients, many of which are easily as powerful as any pharma drug you'll take, although the FDA doesn't consider aging a disease, okay? But those things actually have to be customized for each individual. The amount and the exact combination, the dosage, because not everybody looks the same wearing a gray suit in a crowd, right? Here, technology, including AI and other things like those, can actually help. And this augmentation of the overall focus of our healthcare systems is really badly needed to slow down the aging process for our currently aging population, but also slow down the further degeneration after diseases like COVID. Number 2, we desperately need an antiviral cocktail to treat COVID better, okay? Vaccines are a good step in the fight against this disease. But vaccines are always a retrospective solution, right? The disease has to be in your community, and then you're reacting to it. You're giving something that trains your body to make those Y-shaped proteins, those antibodies, that then go bind to another protein on the virus, inactivates it, right? But as the virus mutates and it makes a slightly different shaped protein, your old antibodies no longer work. So now you need the next generation of the vaccine. You're always one step behind. What about drugs? You all have heard of a drug called Paxlovid from Pfizer, right? It's a really crappy drug, by the way, and with horrible side effects, rebound effects, and all kinds of stuff. And already there is talk in the scientific community that COVID's mutating away from it. You throw one drug at a virus, it's an invitation for it to mutate, okay? Many of these drugs are going after disrupting the virus's reproductive life cycle. So it binds to some protein that the virus makes to replicate its life. And as the virus mutates and it makes a protein with a slightly different shape, the old drug no longer works. There is another class of drugs. Right now, we don't have any such thing for COVID that can actually block the entry. All these viruses need to actually get inside our cells. They use doors, cellular machinery on our own cells to get in. If we can block them, we actually like that approach. Those things actually don't mutate like the viruses do, because those are things on our own cells, okay? But a virus like this uses about 2 or 3 different ways of getting in. You need to block all of them. And you potentially could, block something along its own life cycle as well. Remember, this is how we won the fight against HIV and turned it into a lifestyle disease. Magic Johnson is just fine, because with those 4 antiviral drugs directed at the virus at the same time, the virus can't figure out a way to mutate away from the grips of all 4 at the same time, all right? We need the same thing for COVID. But where is that going to come from? The usual suspects, the Pfizers, the Mercks of the world? Not really. Because the base method for finding drugs, as you heard in the beginning during the introduction, is trial and error. It's not working. The Pfizer CEO, Albert Bourla, put out a very nice book about how they worked round the clock and did this miracle of coming up with Paxlovid in such a short time. You know, marketing brochures and books like those are great, but the reality is entirely different. That molecule that they came up with, they have been working on variants of that since 2002 for various other viral diseases. It's a small little tweak at best on something else, and it's a really, as I said, crappy drug. It doesn't even last in your body very long. Do you know how they solved that problem? By giving you a second drug, ritonavir, which is an HIV drug, which keeps your liver busy. Look up the side effects on Wikipedia. You wouldn't like the list. And it's a beast on your liver, keeps it busy, so you don't have to take the drug 8 times a day, all right? And it doesn't really work very well. So that brings us to point number 3. We need, in general, a better method for coming up with new drugs, all right? As you heard before, of the 10,000 plus human diseases, we can barely treat, I wouldn't say cure, barely treat about 500, and most of them pretty badly, with 3-mile-long side effects lists. That means, as a society, we really need to be able to do better, right? But let's set context for a moment. Most of us don't think every day about what happens when we take that pill. Our bodies are made of these proteins, giant molecules, 6,000 to 10,000 atoms. These fit together to form all our cell structures. Our DNA is just a recipe book for making them. But these proteins are not just forming our cell structures, they're also involved in disease processes. That guy, drawn in blue, could be some enzyme in my brain whose job is to go attach to other proteins and cut them up and form plaque in my brain. Over decades, I might get Alzheimer's. What I want a drug to do is when I take that pill, I want the drug molecules to dissolve in my gut, go through my bloodstream, go find copies of that protein in my brain, then bind to them and prevent them from doing that damage. This is how every drug works. From traditional remedies that have been handed down to us to today's modern pharmaceutical miracles, when we take them, they go bind to some proteins in our bodies and change their functions. So, that guy no longer can bind and cut up the little piece from that other protein. Sitting in the 21st century, let's ask ourselves, why does that drug bind to that protein? Turns out, at that level, it's actually a physics problem. Anirudh was talking about that during his talk about cadence. The drug molecule actually flexes and twists around its chemical bonds. The protein flexes some, and they form this perfect lock and key fit. They form chemical bonds between each other. The next obvious question to ask is, why can't we, atom by atom, design that perfect binder? Should be an obvious thing. Well, we just heard the talk about EDA. We design things with gazillion transistors on those chips. We can simulate all of that, right? Why can't we do it here? People have been talking about this for the last 35 years. But guess what? It's a really hard problem, and we have not been able to turn the corner on it, okay? So this is how the industry finds drugs today. You take the purified protein involved in a particular disease, you dip it down using pipettes into each of those holes that contain a different chemical. You're looking for change in color or temperature, okay? And you say, aha, whatever was in there is a binder to that protein. Is that the final drug? Not necessarily. You feed mice that turn blue or die. You say, okay, I got to tweak this molecule. Make small changes to it, hoping it still binds in that pocket, but will have better properties in the body, okay? How many things can you test this way? If you're the size of Pfizer, maybe about 2 million compounds in your corporate collection. No matter what disease you're going after, you're testing the same 2 million compounds. You're just dipping a different protein in them. Across the whole industry, the corporate collection, it's at Pfizer, Novartis, Roche, and all of these companies, they have huge overlaps. And biotech companies that buy from vendors, these vendor catalogs. So across the globe, we're really testing about 7 million distinct chemical backbones, or chemotypes as they're called, okay? That's not really a very large number, by the way. Anyone want to venture a guess how many drug-like compounds, chemotypes, are actually makeable based on the current rules of organic synthesis that we already know? You could guess. It's 10 to the 33. A billion, trillion, trillion. Think about that. 7 million. We're not even fishing in a tide pool by the side of an ocean. We're fishing in a thimble full of water, okay? And as a result, this is what you see with the industry. R&D productivity keeps falling decade after decade after decade, okay? And that has a direct impact on all of our lives who live in the modern world, okay? There is a lot of talk nowadays about AI solving everything, as you heard earlier, right? It's now the new .com. It's the biggest buzzword out there. And companies are coming out of the woodworks every day saying they're going to use AI to solve all problems in drug discovery. Since this is a technology audience, let's visualize this differently, all right? Imagine you lined up all of those molecules, those 7 million different things that we have already made over the last 150 years along a line, okay? And all the tests we have run against them, against different proteins, other things, okay? And that's where we have the data. I think you know where this is going, right? That line goes on forever, right? We just said billion, trillion, trillion of these things. And all the diseases we still can't treat, and even the current ones that we treat poorly. We have no data over here. Now, AI, of course, needs a lot of data to train, and then if you give it a similar situation, it knows how to interpolate and do curve fitting. But it's really poor at extrapolating, okay? You can use AI to tweak existing molecules and make small changes, okay? Maybe even repurpose an existing drug. You can, speaking of tweaking, it's the same thing medicinal chemists have been doing for the last many decades. Maybe you can do it slightly better and slightly faster. It doesn't really solve the fundamental problem of finding new drugs. You ask AI, trained on that data, to predict something out here, it has zero predictive power. All it can do is cry. So that's the problem with just saying, I'm going to use carte blanche AI to solve everything. I think you heard the echoes of some of this stuff, in an earlier talk that Anirudh gave. So how would he do it? If you can start with any protein of interest that's involved in a disease and run against it billions of novel possibilities that nobody has ever made before, but to do that and figure out what's a perfect binder, you have to do it using physics, okay? Using the actual molecular physics simulations. Figure out where the bonds are forming. And this, by the way, is an incredibly hard problem because at the core level, that's a quantum mechanical problem, which scales very, very badly. So on your regular computers, if you tried brute forcing this problem, with a 10,000 atom protein, you're trying to design a 100 atom drug with tens of thousands of water molecules mediating an interaction, just write it down, the Schrodinger equation, and try to solve it. All the compute power in the world is not going to help you, which is what has held up the field. So people are doing all kinds of heuristic approximations, people are doing various shortcuts, and that leads to inaccuracies, and this is why this thing has not become real yet, okay? But at Verseon, we've been working on it for the last 20 years to build all of the core fundamental science behind it. And I can tell you that this actually can be done, okay? And once you find these things, then you can make them in the laboratory, carry them forward through all the batteries of testing that you otherwise normally do, and the entire paradigm of drug discovery changes now, okay, through this process. Remember that whole uncharted space where we had no data? Using this physics simulations, you can actually find useful islands of data over there and saying the molecules out there are actually really good for that particular protein, all right? Now you can actually then convert these into actual lab data and use AI now on data that, in this case, nobody else would have normally in the industry to optimize them further. AI is useful for that. But we do need to explore this uncharted chemical space. This is how you actually come up with the drugs of the future. You know, we all have this shared vision of the future where someday, just about any disease we should be able to treat with little fanfare, but by just taking a pill. We all know we're very far from that future, right? This is the only way to get there. Those amazing drugs of the future live in that uncharted chemical space, all right? So just to summarize, what we as society really deserve is actually better solutions for health span extension so that we can slow down the damages caused by aging and disease-related damage that goes on with further degeneration. we really badly need these antiviral cocktails. So you can take it at the first sign of disease, or when you know you're going to come into a convention or go to a party, take it as a prophylactic. You know what? If you actually have the entry point inhibitors as well, you get actually a twofer. Most likely, you can also prevent flu. Wouldn't that be nice? And overall, we need a better process for finding drugs. Remember, we all live in the modern world, rely on modern medicine to keep us living healthier, longer lives, okay? And the quality of available treatments makes a direct difference on our lives, on the lives of our loved ones, okay? That's really our message.